So the gentleman was just asking then about, what was your name, sorry? Michael. Was just asking then about the different lines in salmon fishing. And it's a great question actually, because especially in Michael's case, he's been using something like a Monteith, which is good line, you know, back in the day, which is a Spey line. And it's a question I get asked a lot. I teach a lot of Spey casting. And it's like, well, how many lines do we need? What's the difference between an old Spey line? For about the last 20 years, I think it's definitely fair to say that shooting heads have become the most popular line type systems in Britain today. A shooting head is different from a Spey line. Typically shooting head, certainly for rods of say 13, 14, 15 foot in length, are around the high 30s, 40 feet in length, compared to say the older Spey lines, which a medium head length Spey line would have been something like 60 feet, 70 in long, 50 in short. So there lies some of the advantages of shooting heads, is that they're a little bit shorter. And the advantage of a shorter line system, such as a shooting head, is that you can get away with casting them in much more confined spaces. Now this particular one, and I'll get a few options actually. So this particular one is what's a RIO Sage launch. So it's around about the 38 feet. A good tip, by the way, when you're putting shooting heads on, is to make sure that you've got them on the right way round. This is something that I see so much of. Basically the taper wants to be, a little bit of rear taper at the back, and then it wants to be reasonably fat. Now this is where the thickest part of the line is, and then it should be going nice and tapering down towards the front end of this fly line. So basically, if you're getting the line at someone else's line, you think, well, that's quite thin. It's staying thin. It's upside down. And the reason being that we want this weight at the back is because we're predominantly roll casting and Spey casting. You can kind of see, can't you, if I was to make this cast, or slowly anyway, you can see in a D loop there, the fattest part of that line is at the back. The thinnest part of the line is on the water at the front. So basically we've got thick line turning over thin line at the front. If it was the other way around with a lot of fat line on the water and thin line in the D loop, then it's simply not going to lift off the water and turn over. So the line is in three parts really, as most of them are. We've got shooting line. Shooting line itself is can be a potential minefield. You've probably seen monofilament type shooting line. RIO has a version called slick shooter. This is actually metered shooting line, so this one changes colour every 10 feet. It sounds gimmicky, but the colour change is a really good thing. A lot of the gillies are on board with it because it gives you a precise measurement marker effectively. So you can imagine if, like, you know, one of the rods the other week caught, or the other day caught a fish when they had say 30 feet of line out over a given lie, we can pretty much go exactly back to that every time. We're simply looking at the colour changes on the shooting line. Like in that instance, I can see 3 colour changes, so I know that that's, in this instance, 30 feet. Just one, someone was asking me before actually, and these are all questions I get asked a lot. Does the join bother you on the actual shooting line to the actual head itself? And it's a really big thing because a lot of people really get worried about that. And the reason why they get worried about that is when they're playing a fish. And our most popular lines now with RIO lines in Britain, definitely it's a British thing, are integrated, where the shooting line joins into the actual head. But I'll be honest with you, it's something that's never really bothered me. I'll see if I can pull this off, and the reason being, probably doing us out a bit of a disservice. I asked you told that, Martin, at the end of that. Now if you feel that, again, it's maybe sounding a little bit pitchy, but if you look at the actual joins of RIO lines as time's gone on, they're very sleek, as thin as they've ever really been. But people, like I say, people really worry when they're playing fish about that join actually getting stuck or clattering through the guide. So if you just walk a bit further away for us, Martin, keep going, that's it. And I mean, it's only going to cost you calories, but hold the end of the line and walk further back. I work with Martin, by the way. So that's about right. So just to highlight what's going to happen now. So that is a typical, and if you drop your hand, Martin, so you close, that would be like a typical flex on the rod from there. So if you come towards me, Martin, and that's probably been a bit harder than certainly what people that I see. It's actually quite good, this. Feels beautiful. It's not come off yet, which is a shame. But you see how that join's running through the guides? It's not sticking at all. So it just highlights really one of the questions that we get, that it's not a problem. If anything, that's it, you're done, you've come off. Well, exactly, another one's cut. Martin, you couldn't do us a favour, could you just get that leader out of that rod up there for us? Oh, cheers. So yeah, so the join, not necessarily anything to worse. If anything, the worst connection is right at the end with any line system where the end of the fly line, the end of the head is joining onto a versi leader or poly tip, because often it's at the end of the fight, the rod tip is high and the line's coming through a curve, but you're going to get that with pretty much every system. So anyway, is there any other questions on the shooting head? Any other line questions? No? There must be some line questions. Oh, the other thing that I nearly forgot to mention is what goes on the end of these lines. Now, on the end of the line, this particular shooting head, and every shooting head actually, they do need additional taper. If we was just to put level line on the end of there, which is something that I see a lot, you know, whether it's a AFS, it's an outbound, or whoever's lines that they are, they'll just put, say, 15 pound of 10 foot level Maxima, and there's simply not enough taper for that. And you see it when it turns over. I should really take this leader off. In fact, we take that leader off for us a sec, Martin. It's good to be having Martin today. It almost deserves a round of applause, really. So Martin's going to take this tapered leader off. I personally don't fish with the tapered leader that much. The taper I use, or the taper that I put in the fly line, comes in the form of a versi leader, which is basically RIO's term for polytip. Polytip is an airflow term for them 10-foot sinking things that go on the front. So Martin's taken the tapered leader off, and this is pretty much going to behave as if I just had 10 foot of level. And it's a massive thing, because so many people say on lessons why they can't get the line to turn over that well. Now you look at the front end of this head, you see how it kicks down at the end? And it becomes very difficult to present that because there's too much energy, all that energy is running through and just coming to a stop. Do you put that on back on for us, Martin? Cheers, mate. So additional taper in the form of versi leaders or tapered leaders for full, what are referred to as Scandi heads. So the other option that you may have, I mean, this is a line that I would, as it's full floating, as you was asking earlier, with a selection of versi leaders, this is going to be covering most of your low or medium level of salmon fishing. Later on in the season or earlier on in the season, or if we've got extra water, brutally honest, you're not really going to be scratching the surface with full floating shooting heads, if you do indeed want to get down. And that's why we have now multi-density shooting heads, or multi-tip shooting heads, should I say. Now, a multi-tip shooting head is basically similar to that, only now it's been chopped back to accommodate, in this particular instance, a 10-foot heavy duty sink tip. If I had a versi leader with me, you'd see our versi leader's a lot skinnier. And again, that's one of the big questions that I get asked, is what's the difference between a multi-tip or a sink tip compared to, say, a versi leader? Can I put this, in this instance, 10-foot heavy sink tip on the end of that? And you can't, because this tip basically is required for this specific line to bring it to the necessary weight and length to match the rod. Does that make sense? So multi-tips, effectively the tips for multi-tips are an essential part of the head's overall length and weight, whereas versi-leaders, airflows, poly-tips, are additions to go on the end of already full length heads. Does that make sense? Okay, that's good. The other option with that to go even heavier would be something like a game changer. A game changer at one time was Skagit. Now RIO have taken the name, taken Skagit out of the title, and pretty much calling them RIO game changer shooting heads. Is people familiar with a game changer? It's pretty much a ghillies. A lot of the ghillies really like these, and ultimately the difference, just relating it to a Skagit now in its form, you can choose whether you want to make it as a shooting head or a Skagit, and that's largely by selecting different weights, but you can see they're so much thicker than typical it will even shooting heads, and ultimately the advantage of these are to be able to turn over much bigger flies and heavier sink tips. There was a few questions that I had earlier that was, can we actually practice spey casting on grass? Is it worth practicing spey casting on grass? And for me, the answer to that is absolutely. There is some little slight differences. Incidentally, a little tip as well, you see I'm putting this line back on this cassette. I'm taking the time just to put it nicely back on. So tempting just to start winding it over. And that's just to avoid line twists really. So really take your time when you're putting lines back on cassettes and things. So spey casting on grass, the big difference, and it, like I say, really worthwhile doing, but the big difference is that we haven't got an anchor point. So the anchor point, incidentally, when we are spey casting, that tip of that line leaves the water, re-lands on the water, and then we fire the cast forwards. And this is the big difference, and the only difference really, main difference, is as soon as that line hits the grass, it's not going to stick in the same way as it would do if it was on water. So the little tiny adjustment that we make to the cast is simply let it slide back. So when we sweep, no matter what the cast, if it's a single spey as an example, let that line sweep back for a little bit further, and then we make the cast across. I'm just bringing it back so it doesn't land into Simon and Martin over there. But there's some really good things that we can actually look at with spey casting on grass. And one of the big advantages is nothing's going to change. We're not fighting the river currents or the water tension of water, the tension coming from water. So looking at this cast, and this is one of my favourites, and this is the forward spey. For me, this is the true foundations to the spey cast. We're sweeping this line backwards, the line's leaving the water, and we're making this D-loop shape in the fly line itself. And the things that we can really start analysing is, one is our stance, and it's a really big thing really to make sure that our feet are going into the direction that they should be going. And it's one thing that over years I've really made a point of nailing down. You can almost see as I start to change direction, then I'll naturally change my angle of my foot depending on what cast I may be making. Could I try and get around that? Bit risky, Jim. There we go. So you can see how the foot changes on all the casts that I make. So I've always got that leading foot going into that direction. So that's one thing that you can check. The other is the firing position. Now ideally the firing position, and this on grass the roll cast isn't great, but still looking at the firing position that we want to be in, ideally we want to be around about there. And this is something that you can practice even at home with just the butt section, because my experience of teaching spey casting is that it's the firing position that is out most of the time. You know, and I say this on lessons for those that want to do this. Obviously make sure the house is empty so people think, you know, that don't worry that you've lost your mind maybe, but shut your eyes. If you was making, say, a single spey, position yourself on think about where the dangle is, put the mirror across to where, or position you so you're going to be firing into the mirror off say a 45-degree shot, and literally look to where your hands are going to come. Like I say, my experience as teaching Spey casting is that the firing position is in all over, really, well, not the right positions, and the result for the forward cast, it really does make a big difference to get it in the right position. So the correct firing position, really, you'll see how the right hand, the forearm is going straight up. The right hand, ideally, is if I look immediately to my right, I can see that the hand should be pretty much centre of view. And that's the same, again, you see how the foot naturally changes? That's the same with the left hand uppermost as well. When I look straight left, my fist, my hand should be centre of the view there. And other little things as well. So we've got the forearm going straight up, the wrist, should I say, the hand is centre, and the bottom hand now, and this is quite important, that the bottom hand pretty much doesn't want to come past the centre of your chest from there. And ideally, we're just slightly over a rod distance away, what am I on about? Just over a hand distance away from the centre of our chest there. And this is a really important point, and again, when you're at home, no matter what the Spey cast is, you can make this into the mirror and find out exactly where you are. So again, back onto the grass. With this forward Spey, so the cast itself up to head height, sweep to the side, and we can stop in this position to analyse where we're at. See, pretty much as I'm saying where we want to be, you can see everything we talked about, forearm up, bottom hand in the centre of the chest from there. And that one, I know I've been banging on a bit about it, but that's really important. I see this on so many lessons where people take the shot for the cast that they're making and the rod is on this side. It kind of makes sense if this was the river all going that way. It's natural to think that you'd want that hand in that position. Sometimes I do put it in that position. But the trouble is with starting the cast from there, the chances are when you come to make your cast, you're going to find yourself too far over from that position. Does that make sense? And from there, invariably, you're then going to bowl that cast out like so. Whereas when the rod is across the body from there, you're way more likely to get into that firing position. Other advantages as well of starting with that rod across the body, and kind of getting a little bit off track from what we're talking about at practice on grass, is dealing with shooting line. So just bear with me a second, I'll just cast this out. By having the rod across the body, when we're actually, well, let's say the line swung round now, the strips are so much longer than what they would be from there. I'm not walking into the shooting line. As we're collecting this shooting line and wading down, you see how shooting line is being thrown away from me. And it's amazing how often I see this. I mean, as you can imagine, if you're from there, strips are a lot shorter. We're walking into that shooting line, it's getting bloody tangled up round wading staffs and everything else. So just little tips really, but from a firing position, or to assist us get into the firing position, the rod across the body to start with is pretty key. So again, with this forward Spey on grass, raise, sweep to the side, lift into position. So that's the first thing that we've checked now. Or second thing, stance, firing position. The other thing is alignment. Now, does anybody know what alignment means in Spey casting? No one want to take a punt at it? It's a really big thing, actually. It's a massive thing. When we talk about alignment, what we're referring to is the D-loop being aligned to the forward cast. So ideally, if you can imagine, if you was flying a drone above the cast and you did at various pitches, it should be a total straight line from your D-loop going to your forward target. A little bit easier to think of maybe with single-handed casting. The back cast should be directly opposite the forward cast. Have many of you crossed the line when you've been fishing? You know, the fly has bit into you've basically had a mid-air collision. Well, that is a result of the alignment being out. So as an example, on this grass, practicing on the grass, we can see the alignment clear as day as I raise up. Sweep to the side and lift and stop, firing position, stance. That D loop ideally should be going directly opposite to where you want to go. And that will be a nicely aligned cast. So as an example, if I would see, if I was practicing and I seen that, where the D loop is going behind me, because I've over rotated the shoulders, the chances are when I fire the cast forwards, you can see I'm going to get that line to cross, so I've broke the alignment. So again, another advantage of casting on grass, that we can pretty much nail down our alignment, stop it, check, yep, I'm not over rotated on the shoulders, everything's going nicely opposite to where I intend to go. And not just with this cast, as an example, if I was using, say, a single spey and I stop, is that D loop going directly opposite where I want it to go? i.e., let's imagine 45 degrees across. In this instance, it is. Like I pretty much touched on, one of the biggest faults of not making a breaking alignment is that a bit too much over rotation of the shoulders. And again, but just by stopping and looking at your firing position, you're going to know if you've over rotated because your hands are over in that from there. Does that make sense? Again, raise, sweep and turn, stop, check, alignment. So all these things now we can start to address, you know, close to where we live. And for me, I'm a massive advocate of practicing your fly casting, whether that's spey casting or single-handed. There can be no disadvantage of being as good as you can be where casting's concerned. You'll often hear that people will say, oh, well, yeah, but old Bob, he catches a ton of fish and he's not a very good caster. But to quote Michael Evans back in the day, I've seen little evidence of someone that catches fish in lots of different situations who isn't a good caster. So the other thing really that we can look at, and the thing I'd really kick myself if we didn't, was the shapes that we're making in our line, i.e. loops. Now, does everybody know what a loop is? Okay. Anybody want to have a punt at what a loop is? I ask this question, by the way, on every demonstration that I do, and I'll say, does everybody know what a loop is? Everybody nods. When I say, okay, I'm going to ask somebody now, then you see people walk backwards. The loop, and I'm always pretty surprised that people don't know what a loop is, that have been fishing for lots of years. So we've got the D loop, that's the bit at the back there, and the forward loop, as it's referred to, as that line goes over that rod tip, it makes like that shape, yeah. So if you imagine that's the cast, the rod's stopped, the line's flown over the rod tip, and it's making that U, or ideally, that V shape in the front of the fly line. And this is colossal, because good casters will often judge a cast simply by the shape, or the shape of that loop. A good instructor, incidentally, can read what's happened with that resulting cast, or that previous cast, should I say, simply by how that loop looks. We've got two main types of loops. There's actually three with a tailing loop, or a collision loop, that's four. The two main types of loops are tight and open. In this instance, that's a tight loop, where you can see there's not much distance between the bottom leg of the loop and the top leg of the loop. So that's quite narrow, and in most situations, not all, that is the loop shape to try and get. Anybody know why a tight loop might be better than an open loop? That's an open loop where there's loads of distance now between the bottom leg of the fly line to the top. Any ideas why a tighter loop, such as that, might be the better shape to achieve? When, yeah, absolutely, less resistance, right? So the tighter loop is not going to be subject to as much drag. It's a more aerodynamic shape. The face of the loop is a lot smaller compared to an open loop. The open loop, a big wide surface area. I always like to give people credit that come up with some of these great quotes, but it was Charles Jardine that I heard. He said, well, The open loop is like an open umbrella. If you think of an open loop that you push into breeze, you're gonna feel quite a bit of resistance from it. If you shut that umbrella, it's like the tight loop. It's gonna really pace through that breeze so much easier. So absolutely, windier conditions is a great answer. Other advantages of a tight loop is that ultimately we're going to get more tension from a tight loop, and just by making some of these now. It's way easier to create and hold on to the tension from a tighter loop than what it is with a more open loop, such as that. Now incidentally, and as you can imagine, from distance point of view, a tighter loop, because it's going to be moving that bit faster, it's more air resistant, it's going to cast that so much more easier compared to, say, an open loop, which is a lot more rounder. That's going to be quite difficult to achieve that range, like so. And to be fair, I didn't really hit it as hard, but you can see how it didn't quite go as well. The tight loop, incidentally, people have got all kind of answers for what a tight loop, what causes a tight loop. People will say, well, you know, it's about smooth application of power, or you stop early. There's only really one total true answer to what creates a tight loop, and that is moving this rod tip in a straight line path. While it is true that a short stroke will more likely to give you a tight loop, it's just less likely to come off that straight line path compared to a more open stroke, a more longer stroke, should I say. But we can still make very tight loops off longer strokes, providing we keep the rod tip travelling in a straight line. And often the firing position, if the firing position's out, and one good example of it, the bottom hand has come too far away, then we're going to set, this is classic setting up now for a more open loop, because the rod tip is going to move in a bit of a windscreen wiper movement, like so. So whenever you see, and the same with single-handed casting, whenever you see the rod tip start arcing like that, then it will be an open loop. And this is bad. The open loop's bad for a few reasons, as we've seen from a distance point of view. But for me, from a fishing point of view, it's pretty colossal, because if you look at an open loop, and if I make an open loop and shoot it, it will go. What part of the line landed first then on the water? What part would you say? Belly. Absolutely, the belly. Whereas the tight loop, what part of the line is first to land now? It's the front end, it's the tip of the line. And also, because I'm in the tight loop, because I've kept the rod tip high, gives you so much more options now for what you want that line to do when you're swinging. If it was the belly of the line first, well, that's it. You're kind of running out of control straight away. Whereas if I can create, or we can create that tight loop, keep that rod tip high, then we've got so much more available options to us when we shot out, whether we want to mend downstream or upstream, or simply let the line drop and set it swinging straight away. So for me anyway, it makes you that bit more effective as a fisherman as well. So that's loop shapes, alignment, stances, and the cast really to practice. And the big difference of it, again, just to quickly recap, is to let that line slide back. Still really important that you get it opposite your casting shoulder, but almost boring saying it, but it's true, between a rod and a half, and have a target such as whatever it is, a plate or a can of Coke or whatever, and try not to cheat yourself. I know I touched on that a little bit earlier on, because the trouble is it's so easy to completely miss your anchor, as I'm doing. You've got tons of tension, but you're not helping yourself that much because you're missing your anchor. So really try and put that line down in that area, let it slide, and then make the shot. Is there any more questions from there? All right, well, thank you for listening. Cheers.